We'll go ahead and get started. If you'd like, you can go ahead and turn to 2 Samuel chapter 20.
2 Samuel chapter 20. We've been studying the life of David for some time now, and as we look at David's life, it seems like there's a pretty great and distinct division in David's life, and it seems like 2 Samuel 11 is that division. Before that event, in 2 Samuel 11, we see David, and even in his youth, we see a strong, vibrant young man who trusts in the Lord, and the Lord rewards him, and he's victorious in everything that he sets his hand to. Whether it's just a shepherd overtaking lions and bears that would defeating them and protecting the sheep, or the giant Philistine and other events. It's just whatever David puts his hand to. His trust is so great that he believes that the Lord will be with him, and he is. The Lord is with him. Even in David's darker times when he was on the run from Saul, you look at that time span of his life, and David was far from living the life of luxury, but still his faith remained sure during that time. And I think a lot can be said about that. It's one thing to say, well, I trust in the Lord. I've got faith in the Lord when all is going well with your life. But when you face adversity, and we all face it at certain points of our life, we all have those downs, those valleys, those low points. And, do we respond in the same way? Do we trust in God and trust that, even though we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, we don't know how it's going to turn out exactly, we trust in the Lord that He will guide us through it, and trust that He will take care of things. But once David has that event with Bathsheba, everything seems to spiral in a lot of ways. Now, he's still able to, operate as king and run the nation of Israel, and I think he makes, probably for the most part, good decisions with that. But what about his relationship with his family? How does that turn out? Yeah, it does. I mean, it really does. You think about the story with Amnon, his first son, firstborn, and Tamar, and that story was just sickening, the way that unfolded. And then things, because of David's lack of response to that situation, what does that promote? More chaos within the family. Absalom steps in and takes on the role of carrying out justice that really needed to be carried out by. Now, it wasn't Absalom's role, no question, but because David did not respond in that situation, we see Absalom, I think the third-born, taking matters in his own hands and avenging his sister's, adversary, you might say. So.
It's probably one of the more magnified places that we see the consequences of sin.
Yeah.
Even though forgiveness is offered, consequences still come along.
Absolutely.
With wrongdoing.
And me and Alan talked about it. There's a story that we'll get to later on tonight. But yeah, talking about those consequences of sin. So many people think, it's my sin, it's my life. It won't affect anybody else but me. But is that what we see? Is that what we see in the pages of Scripture? Is that what you see with your own eyes when you see people going through situations? Do you see that their sin just isolates them and never affects anybody else?
No.
It always affects friends, family, loved ones, those closest to you. That's who it affects most. Sometimes it expands further than that and affects people. And that's what we're seeing with David. His sin is going to affect not only him, but it's going to affect his household. And in a lot of ways, it's affecting the nation. Even as we get to tonight's story, we've seen the rebellion of his own son, Absalom, and that took a toll on Israel, the nation of Israel. I mean, they have to, pick sides on this situation, and we see a nation that's divided. Of course, we've seen those cracks, as Lonnie's talked about already. We've seen those cracks within the nation already, but now it seems like those cracks are widening even more. And now it's David's responsibility to try to bring the kingdom back together and try to put all the pieces back together. And if the rebellion of Absalom wasn't enough, we're introduced to another character, Sheba. He was a Benjamite. And what was the description of Sheba? You remember what? I think it's the beginning of chapter 20. Yeah, worthless fellow, worthless man. And he is going to lead somewhat of a rebellion and take the 10 northern tribes with him. Let's go to our tribes, back to our camps. And, again, we have another threat on the horizon. No sooner does David get Absalom under control, that situation under control, but now he has another rebellion on the horizon, and he's going to have to deal with that.
And it seems like he didn't even make it home before that happened.
Yeah.
Which seems to be a pattern in David's life. It seems like he can't get out from under one thing before another thing is coming his way. Except for the time period where right before he had his sin with Bathsheba, he had a period of peace, it seems like, in his life. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it's been turmoil and chaos nearly his entire life.
Yep. Well, in chapter 20, he deals with some other issues, smaller issues, deals with some individuals that he had occurrences with as he was leaving Jerusalem, such as Shimei. You remember Shimei? You remember Ziba and his story, painting a dark shadow on Mephibosheth. And, of course, we never did hear. We heard Mephibosheth's side of the story. We've heard Ziba's side of the story. I think most of us probably lean toward Mephibosheth's story, but, the Bible doesn't tell us which side was actually true. But David is having to deal with some of these things, and now it's time to deal with the threat that Sheba is creating, and that's the rebellion. And always when you have a threat of rebellion, it always encompasses a number of people, but the one head person, the head that is spearheading the whole cause and whatnot is the main concern. If you can take the main figurehead out, then usually those rebellions are snuffed out. And so that's David's ploy tonight. Any thoughts? Any comments?
Joab, a lot of times, took up leadership where David didn't, and that causes a little bit of rift too.
Yeah. At the start of this, as David is unfolding his plan to carry out the taking out of Sheba, who's the captain of his army?
Amasa.
It's Amasa, and we know that just 2 + 2 is 4. We know that because of the way Joab carried out Absalom's fall, we know that he's demoted Joab. But how did that turn out? Does Joab take that in stride? Joab's a ruthless man, and he doesn't allow his position to be filled by other people. We've seen that with Abner, and now we've seen that with Amasa, and we're exposed to the cruelty that Joab is prone to as well.
One thing that this all about David up to this point and later on through his life to his death. The big thing I get out of it is God says that David is a man after his own heart. And it gives us hope that even though David was a lot of times right following God, and then he failed by sin, and then he repented, that we see in Psalms of how he went to the Lord and asked for forgiveness, and God let him spare his life, even though he went through this stuff with his sons and shame that the other country and tribe actually seen that he done by his lack of being king what he should have done. But I think that it gives us hope that we as humans, that as we go through the trials of today, and that if we fail, if we go back to God and ask for repentance and change our life like David did towards the end, up to his death, it gives us hope that even though as we as humans fail, as long as we do what God commands and strives to change and repent of our old sins, that we have a home in heaven.
Absolutely. You know, I've said it many times. If the heroes of the faith were depicted throughout Scripture as being perfect, and God didn't expose their shortcomings, I would lose hope. I would think, hey, this isn't achievable. There ain't no way I could live up to these people's, examples or expectations. But, God did choose to show us their shortcomings, their shortfalls. And I think that's a positive in a way, because we can relate to that. Every single one of us can relate to that. No question. You got anything else?
I don't think so.
All right. Let's find our place here in 2 Samuel 20, beginning in verse 14. Now, David's military, his mighty men are on their way to seek out Amasa. And now Amasa's a Benjamite. Let's keep that in mind. But he's fleeing, and he's fleeing north is where he's going. He's going to end up north of the Sea of Chinneroth, or Sea of Galilee, up toward the area of Naphtali, or northern border of Dan is where this event here is going to take place. So he's on the run seeking refuge where he can. Verse 14, and Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel of Beth-maachah, and all the Bichrites assembled and followed him in. And all the men who were with Joab came and besieged him in Abel of Beth-maachah. It says they cast up a mound against the city, and it stood against a rampart, and they were battering the wall to throw it down. So here, Sheba seems to have tried to fortify himself in this city and holding himself up in the city, and yet, this whole expedition, this whole group is centered after one person, but who is he putting in jeopardy? Who's in threat? Yeah, the entire city. We kind of seeing signs of, that character that is portrayed at the beginning of the chapter, a worthless man. He's not willing to confront, this situation on his own. He's going to try to hide behind people. He's going to try to hide behind common people and try to seek refuge among them and put them in jeopardy.
Right opposite of David.
Right, exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah, the right opposite of David. Verse 16, then a wise woman called from the city, listen, tell Joab, come here that I may speak to you. And then he came near her. And the woman said, are you Joab? He answered, I am. Then she said to him, listen to the words of your servant. He answered, I'm listening. Then she said, they used to say in former times, let them but ask counsel of Abel. And so they settled a matter. In other words, this city was known for its wisdom. Verse 19, I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord? Joab answered, far be it from me, far be it, that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not true. But a man of the hill country of Ephraim, called Sheba, the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give up him alone, and I will withdraw from the city. And so this woman inquires of Joab, and it's interesting. Joab is as ruthless, and that he seems at times he's able to calm himself and have a civil discussion with this woman from the city wall there. And she lets him know that, hey, we're not a part of this. We're not harboring, or of course she's completely unaware of what's really taking place here. And Joab fills her in on the, what's taking place. This man has created crimes against King David, and that's who they're after. They're just after one person. They're not looking to destroy the city, but at the same time, the city is suffering casualty because of this one man. And so this woman, this city has a decision to make on this occasion. What are they going to do? Are they going to, allow this man to hole up in their city and have their city destroyed, or are they going to turn this man over? So the woman says to Joab, behold, his head shall be thrown over the wall to you. Then the woman went to all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they dispersed from the city, every man to his home. And Joab returned to Jerusalem to the camp. So, as is common throughout Scripture, it seems like you have an event that builds, and you get to the climax of it, and you're thinking of, a great battle scene or something taking place, and then boom, it's just over that fast. And this is one of those scenarios that plays out. Here, this woman is able to convince the people, that, hey, this one man right here is causing this whole thing. And all we have to do is turn him over to Joab, and all this will be over with. And it's certainly not hard for the people to see the wisdom in that. They turn him over.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that she makes the claim that they're peaceable and faithful in Israel, and so based off their action, it shows that they are peaceable and faithful to Israel, to David here. And I think, listen back on the recordings, Nathan actually, when he was attending here, made the comment that they were peaceable and they were faithful, but they had sin in their camp, and they had to get that out for them to remain faithful and peaceable. And I thought that was a really good point. But yeah, you see, Joab has different sides of him, and it seems like I wonder if it's only because this woman is not a threat to his position or to what he's after, and so he's willing to listen. But I think any other thing that would be threatening that, he's not really willing. And it seems like him and David, they just don't deal with each other. Like, David doesn't call him and talk to him or anything like that, and he doesn't really go to David. He just kind of deals with the situation and then talks to David later. And so I think that that's interesting. And he might know the way Joab is, it ain't going to do me any good to talk to him. And so, but yeah, it's definitely good that Joab listened, and it's good that the woman called for Joab. Saved a lot of lives this day.
Certainly saved a lot of lives on this occasion. And I like the point that you mentioned of what Nathan said as far as purging sin from the camp. This was an occasion, an opportunity that could have went really, really bad. And maybe the idea of, like you said, this city does portray itself as a peaceful. They haven't, up to this point, they haven't retaliated in any way and whatnot. And so it lent itself on this occasion to have the discussion. This woman discussing the matter with Joab without things getting any worse. Any thoughts? Any comments? Take the rest of the chapter.
Yeah. And Joab was over all the army of Israel. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Adoram was in charge of the revenue. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was a recorder. Sheba was a scribe. Zadok and Abiathar were the priests. And Ira, the Jerethite, was chief minister under David. And so they kind of just sum up who's kind of over things under David's command at this time, or I guess after this encounter here. I still never did find anything about having the two high priests. I didn't look at it just a ton, but I couldn't find anything. What little bit of research I did, but we do see that David has a new chief minister. His last one defected and then ended up killing himself, and so we do have another person in that position now as well.
And who's commander of the army?
So, yeah,
That's interesting, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, it seems, I don't know. Some people say that the end justifies the means or whatever, and maybe he's just, I don't know. David's indecisive enough as it is, and Joab's a hard man to get him to do what you want him to do. So I don't know, but he will be dealt with later.
Yeah, and that may be David's thought at this point in time. There's been a lot of upheaval in David's life here, of recently, and he's just looking to try to settle things down. And he's like probably thinking, right now is not the point to pick this battle with Joab.
Kill another one.
This man has no problem taking lives, so I'll put him back in his position, leading the army, which he's very good at for the most part. And this is an issue he'll take up later. It's probably his thought. Any thoughts, comments? You want to carry on?
Yeah, I'll carry on. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord. And the Lord answered, "It is because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites." So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but the remnant of the Amorites. The children of Israel had sworn to protect them, but Saul sought to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. And so do you remember who the Gibeonites were?
They're the tribe that deceived Joshua and the children of Israel.
Right, the people that deceived, they put on old clothes and moldy bread, and they said that they've come a long way, and Israel just made a covenant with them. They didn't inquire of the Lord or anything, so God's holding them up to that promise that they made. But so here it says that Saul, he was bloodthirsty for them and was going to wipe them out. And it mentions because of his zeal for Israel and Judah. It doesn't say for his zeal for the Lord or any of those things. It's just really to expand his territory, I guess you could say.
And it may have been, with Saul, we saw how, he was zealous at times and then he wasn't zealous. He was kind of back and forth.
Right.
I think this is one of those high points in fulfilling the command of, wiping out the Canaanites that Israel never did. So this was an effort on his part to carry that out.
Right.
That what Israel had never done. But as you said, there was a covenant made with these people. They were, off
Off limits.
right, to do that sort of thing.
And I think that should bring, at least to my mind, that's very interesting that the Lord is upholding that promise, even though that they were really supposed to be wiped out. But because that promise was made, he's making sure Israel's upholding their end of that bargain. And so even a rash vow, you need to, as best of your ability, keep it.
Keep your word.
Right.
Saul never did actually commit to any vows that he was actually given. I mean, is his kingship beginning that he didn't do what God told him to do when he went to war? He didn't kill everything. He didn't kill the king. And I just think this is his pride. Him just wanting to be, hey, I'm king, I'll do what I want to, no matter what God says. And then God's using this time to put back what was already covenants that was made by the children of Israel, even though they were deceived at the time.
Yeah. An effort of show. I agree. It probably was an effort of show on Saul's part.
Yeah. And also notice that it says Saul and his bloodthirsty house. So it's not just Saul in this sin. It is his house and some of his own family members involved in this as well. And I think that's why we're going to come to the conclusion that we do, is it's not just his sin, which it very well could be, but it mentions that it's his bloodthirsty house, not only him, if that makes sense to you. And I'm sure there'd be land and things to gain from wiping these people out that they were interested in doing, and making Judah or Israel better for that in their eyes anyway.
And, again, he would feel justified because, Israel was supposed to wipe out the Canaanites to begin with.
Right.
They never fulfilled that command. So,
anything that y'all would like to say? I can keep going if you want me to.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, David said to the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? And with what shall I make atonement, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord? And the Gibeonites said to him, We will have no silver or gold from Saul or from his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us. So he said, Whatever you say, I will do for you. Then they answered the king, As the man who consumed us and plotted against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel, let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose. And so here they come to an agreement or a conclusion that they want what they want for, I guess you could say, retaliation or what is the word they use? Atonement for what they've been through. And so they want 7 of Saul's descendants. They want them hanged, but they want them. Where do they want to hang them at? In Gibeah. Remember where Gibeah was? And what's the significance of Gibeah? Saul's hometown. And so they're going to do that in Saul's hometown. And I think that's kind of 2 things, right? So it would be showing that those relatives are probably living in that town, or some of his relatives are living in that town. And it shows that what he did was not right. And so it's not just going to be like, okay, we're going to take them over here and do it here. It was a very open thing and a display to show that, he said he was going to kill these Canaanites, but there was this covenant made, and God is upholding that covenant, and that's when we have a famine in the land. And I think somebody had made a comment, if you've had a bad crop or whatever, you think, well, it was just circumstance or whatever, but 3 years, something's wrong.
Consecutive,
right.
Year after year after year.
And so something's wrong, so we have to see what's going on here. And so this is what they ask of David, and David says that he will do this. But he's going to try to work around some stuff, it seems like, to keep up some promises that he's made. And so, like we mentioned before, if you make a vow, the best of your ability, you need to keep that vow. And David's going to do that as he moves forward.
Yeah, and so, it's not like, David is trying to sidetrack and he's cherry picking people who he wants to be the sacrificial lambs and those that he doesn't want to. But it's, as we're going to see, there's a reason, there's a cause for it. Verse 7, but the king spared Mephibosheth. Now, who's Mephibosheth? Yeah, Jonathan's son. And it gives us a reason why he's going to spare him. This is because of the oath of the Lord that was made between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So I'm sure Mephibosheth is awfully thankful for that oath that was made. His life is spared, but others are not. So you have to keep in mind that, this requirement isn't that David can go and just take some real distant relatives. No, it's, it needs to be more, recent relatives of Saul for this to be satisfied. So it says in verse 8, the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul. Armoni and Mephibosheth just happens to be the same name as the other individual. And the 5 sons of Merab, the daughter of Saul, whom she bore to Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Maholathite, and gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites. And they hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. And the 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first days of harvest, at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is one of those lessons that is tough. Because the person that carried this out isn't alive anymore. But it was, it was an act that was open, that all the people were aware of. All the people knew that it was the wrong thing to do. Everyone was aware of the oath that was made to the Gibeonites. That's the thing about this time frame and Israeli history was that the history that was the verbal history that was carried out throughout verbal throughout history, lineage after lineage after lineage, so they remembered things. Things weren't able to be recorded as well as what we able to record things today, but that oral tradition, that oral history that they kept was spectacular. And so everybody knew of the covenant that was made with the Gibeonites, but Saul broke that covenant. And so everybody was aware of what took place. And as Alan said, this was something that needed to be carried out publicly, so that all people realized that this was dealt with. But on the other hand, you think of other situations like, moving forward in history when we get to Ezekiel, and in particular Ezekiel 18, when the Lord tells Ezekiel to tell the people, there is a proverb that is not to be used anymore. Anybody remember what that proverb is? Anybody know that proverb offhand? The father eats sour grapes and it sets the children's teeth on edge. You remember that now? Yeah. What does that mean?
Children, they were father's down.
Absolutely. So, God says, you are not to use that because that's not true. Everyone is accountable for their own actions. But what do we have here? It seems that the descendants of Saul are going to be accountable for the father's actions, as it were.
I think that the other thing, that the reason that this was done publicly, so that all the tribes and the people actually heard and seen, witnessed it, it's like the judgments of even back during Moses, of when you did certain violations against God's law, you wasn't given a long time. You were immediately stoned or killed or whatever right there at the time. Even when they went against God at different places, he wiped out thousands for doing the transgressions that they did. And I think it's a point that God's actually showing not only to them, but us today, that he's a judge and a God that judges. He don't take any priority from one to the other. If you're guilty and you disobey his commandments, and if it's a death sentence, it's carried out, and it says, I think Solomon said, fear God and keep his commandments is the whole duty of man, to worship God and fear him. But the fear is that we should know that he's a just God, and if we do violations of sin, whether sometimes it's done immediately, if you don't get forgiveness of the sin, the verdict is death. Whether it's here, this actually, I think, spurs the people more so that when they see this happen, they go, when the Levitical tribe is actually teaching the people the law, they go, what God's saying is true. Look, there's these men got killed from disobeying through what Saul did. So we need to keep the law, or we'll become under his condemnation to our death ourselves.
Yeah, when you look at God's law and look at God from the very beginning, from the earliest of man, what kind of expectation did he expect from the people as far as how were the people to value human life? What kind of precedent did he set with that? Absolutely. And, that was from very early on. That was even before the law of Moses, very early on, that, the one that shed blood, his blood shall be required. And God sets a very high standard on the value of life. And I like what Bob mentions in his book. That precedent has been set during a patriarchal age, under the law of Moses, and even under the law of Christ. But it was really designed to bring us to Christ. Because if that statute was not there, if that value wasn't instilled in the hearts of men to value human life, how valuable would Christ's death appear to us.
There wouldn't.
If man doesn't value human life, then what is his sacrifice going to mean to us? Yeah, it's not going to mean anything to us.
It doesn't say here that these 2 sons and 5 grandsons were bad people.
No. No.
So you can imagine these parents, what are they going to do?
Absolutely.
And you pick right out,
Yeah, fixing to.
that's a tough thing.
That'd be a tough pill to swallow, wouldn't it? But you know, that's kind of the way justice works, is it not?
Man at home, and they come in your house and say, well, we gotta have,
Yeah.
we gotta have.
And that appears that's the way it unfolded. It's tough. It's tough. You know, these are some, and again, when we stray off of what that righteous path, these are the kind of events that, you know, unfold. This is the kind of things we get caught up in. And it's ugly and it's not fun to study or go over, but you know, these are some of those necessary things that are difficult lessons to, and that's the main thing, is that, you know, we learn the value of life that God puts on life, and we appreciate that and value that just as He does. You got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that. And it doesn't help me wrap my mind around it any easier. But it almost seems like God is allowing the Gibeonites to choose what the punishment for this sin is. And again, it didn't help much, but just know that they are not children of Israel that are proclaiming this and carrying this out. It will be the Gibeonites. But again, it seems like when we get to the end of the chapter, or to 14, it seems like God is pleased with this being carried out.
You want to take the next section?
Yeah. Now Rizpah, the daughter of Ai, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock, from the beginning of the harvest until the late rains poured on them from the heavens. She did not allow the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor beast of the field by night. And David was told what Rizpah, the daughter of Ai, the concubine of Saul, had done. Then David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the streets of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them up, and after the Philistines had struck down Saul in Gilboa. So he brought up the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from there, and they gathered the bones of those who had been hanged. They buried the bones of Saul and Jonathan his son in the country of Benjamin and Zelah, in the tomb of Kish his father. So they performed all that the king had commanded, and after that God heeded the prayer for the land. So here you have this woman that's out there guarding the bodies day and night, and it seems like, going back and listening to the recording, it is all summer. You kind of sum up that she stays out there day and night, keeping the birds off of them during the day and the beast off of them at night, and she's mourning this whole summer because of what's been done to her family. And it seems like that David tries to honor their deaths in some way by letting them be buried with Saul and Jonathan. That would be an honor. And
with Kish.
right, and with Saul's father, Kish. And so this woman, in her mourning and her great devotion to her family, she stays out there all summer. And then David, trying to repay some kindness that he can, does them this honor and have them buried with Saul and Jonathan and his father Kish in there. And it says at the end that after that God heeded the prayer for the land. So the famine is over at this time. That this sin that Saul had committed and his family, that this action atones for that sin. And like Gerald mentioned before, life is precious, and God wants everybody to know that. And the ones that Israel He has commanded Israel to take out, they've lived so long, and they've pretty much made their own choice that their life isn't precious anymore and are not worth living, and so God is having those people removed. And so that's something else to keep in mind as we go through the text, because we're going to be talking about Philistines in just a minute. And somebody might say, well, are they not people too? Well, they are, but they've reached a point in their life where God says, well, you've decided that your life is not worth living, and so I'm going to take it from you.
Yeah, and going back, again, I'll ask the question, does your sin only affect you? This is one of those obvious stories that says, no, it doesn't. And, again, this is one of those stories that is heartbreaking. It's, certainly we can all feel sympathetic for those that lost loved ones, especially in this way. At this point in time, you thought this was, forgotten.
Yeah.
And you thinking of moving forward, then everything comes to a screeching halt, and you have to address something that happened years and years ago. This wasn't something that just happened 3 years previous. This had happened years and years before. And I'm sure everybody felt like they had moved on from that point, but God said, not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah, and the promise was probably, 400 years prior? And so I don't know if that, maybe Saul was like, well, that was back then and this is now. But to God, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if we, some of us, we hate our past. 20 years ago, we were terrible people. Well, if you've not got forgiveness for that sin and you've not repented of that sin, it's still with you unless you do something about it. And I think we learned that from this lesson. It doesn't matter the time that's passed. Sin is still sin if something's not been done about it.
No statute of limitations this there as far as time goes. Anything anybody else would like to contribute, add to this story?
David had feelings for this woman. He could feel her grief.
Sure.
And that's the way it should be with us. When we see someone grieve a loss, we do what we can to ease.
Absolutely.
That's what he did.
David suffered loss, hadn't he? He suffered loss of his own household. So I think he closely related to this situation and understood the grief that she was going through.
And I had mentioned before that the Gibeonites carried this out. And one of the reasons that makes a difference is what would happen if Israel would have carried this out, if they would have hung these men. They couldn't have stayed there all summer. They would have to take them down before the sun goes down. And so that makes a difference in this being carried out. With the Gibeonites carrying it out, they stay there all summer and hang there all summer. But in Israel, in their rules and regulations, they couldn't leave a body hanging. They had to take it down. And so that's also something that allows for this to occur the way it does.
That's interesting. I forgot about that. Well, I don't know that we got time to go into 15 on.
Well, I'll ask another question.
Good.
You mentioned that the Gibeonites carried this out. But it says back in verse 4, the Gibeonites said, it is not for us to put any man to death in Israel. And then they asked for saving.
Well, I don't think they
I don't understand.
I don't think they knew that they didn't have the authority themselves to carry this out on their own. They needed the king's authority. They needed Israel's authority to carry this.
That's what I said. I really didn't know.
They didn't have the authority to carry out vigilante justice, as it were. They needed civil authority to be able to give the ruling.
I think also the way that it's stated there is they wouldn't actually go out and find these men and then bring them to hang them. They wanted the king to actually bring them to them.
Yeah, they didn't want to take them. They want to be given.
Right. So they're not actually going out into Israel taking them. Yeah. The kings delivered the men to them, and then they go ahead and hang them there. And I think that's what comes into play about that they wouldn't go out into the land of Israel by the way that's worded. Yeah. That's just how I get it.
Of course, this was all initiated by God through the famine.
Right.
But again, of course, David inquires. He knew something was wrong.
Right.
And he inquires of the Lord, and the Lord allows him, gives him the info on what's going on here. And so David approaches the Gibeonites about this. You know, I don't know if, of course, obviously they hadn't forgotten about it, but they may have lost hope in any justice ever being carried out. But David is the one that comes before the Gibeonites to ask them, you know, what is required to make this right.
And I think also David knew that, you know, we ain't having this famine just because we're not getting rain. That
Yeah.
there's some kind of sin going on that needs to be handled.
Yeah, Elijah's a few years down the road before he
Yeah.
makes his prayer of drought. Anyone wants to add in closing? Yeah.
One last thing, when we look at this whole thing playing out, you have to understand the Gibeonites, they were slaves, they were servants, they were woodcutters, they were
Right.
aliens in a nation that they shouldn't be in at all, really. And they had no authority, they had no justice, nothing.
Right.
And this was God's way of taking care of these people in that respect, just like He will us, if we will allow Him to do so.
Yeah, remember.
Vengeance is mine, said the Lord, I hold it back.
Yep.
We humble ourselves before God, and He'll take care of us.
That's exactly right. You remember when they made this covenant and they found out the truth behind the Gibeonites being, you know, neighbors of them, Joshua made them slaves, and they were the water carriers. They were the, you know, the woodcutters and stuff for the sacrifices for the worship and whatnot to the Lord. So yeah, that's what they've been doing for all these 400 plus years, as you've said.
Yeah.
So yeah, they didn't have any authority. They had no power. They were just slaves. So they were at every king's command or whatever, everyone's whim. And so they were the least powerful people in Israel, I guess you'd say.
And so
Good point.
that just shows you the atrocity that Saul's when he's killing them. I mean, these are slaves. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not a threat.
They had nobody looking out for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Except God.
Except for God. That's it. That's it. Well, all right. Sure appreciate y'all's contribution to tonight's class. And Lonnie will be back Wednesday night to clean up anything that me and Alan did. Thank y'all.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.